Hi QA folks, today let's talk about how would you build test automation from scratch, or how can you build test automation from scratch, what answers should you ask yourself and the team, and what layers should you have. So first of all, ask your manager if you can use some paid tools if needed, like AWS Device Farm for mobile devices, or Cypress Cloud, or any other cloud-based services to run in different browsers and so on. But in most cases, you will be asked to do it using free open source tools. But anyway, it's better to ask in advance to understand which direction you can go. Next one, understand deployment process and release cycle, path to production in terms of test environments. Meaning that how many full test environments do you have? Will you need to run your test against each and every test environment, or you have only just one test environment for everything? If you have you will have to implement switcher to run on different environments in your test automation framework and so on. That's why it's important to understand this one. Next one, understand timeline. Do you want to have quick test automation or stable test automation? Tools might be different depending on the answer. Next question, understand available build infrastructure and tooling. Is there something that can be used for test automation purposes, like build agents on CI/CD? And also take into consideration what programming language do the development team use, and the infrastructure will be depending on that one. Maybe you can use the same programming language if you're familiar with that. Next, let's see what layers can you name or should you have for test automation in your test automation framework. And it's one of the questions that is asked on the interviews. So I would say that you should have UI layer, some actions to do on UI. Like if it's web, you can use Selenium library for that, or Playwright, or whatever. API layer to automate tests, API tests. If you're using Selenium, then with Java, for example, Selenium can be used only to interact with web pages. It has nothing to do with API testing. So for API testing, you will have to use another library. Like for example, with Java, it can be REST assured. If you're using Playwright with JavaScript, then Playwright, being the fully ready test automation framework, can work with both UI and API. So if you will need to write UI tests, you will have some class responsible for UI layer, separate classes responsible for API tests, API layer, then WebDriver initialization class, which will handle manage WebDriver and create WebDriver objects for your pages and everything. Then base page class, where you can put your commonly used methods and then inherit your page classes from this class to reuse your code. Page object classes, meaning if you are going to use, you're most likely going to use page object model, and you will have page object classes to describe pages you work with. Then base test class, when you can keep your, also for usability of your code, when you can put your verification, common use verification methods, because page object in classic implementation, page object classes, they shouldn't have any asserts at all. Only interaction with web page and then all assertions and verification should be handled either in your test specification in your test classes with your test, and in this case you can inherit them from this base test class to reuse commonly used methods. The next layer is test classes themselves, where you will write your test scenarios, test scripts. Next kind of additional layer on top of test classes, if you are going to use data providers, if you are using data-driven approach, where you will pass both input and output parameters to your tests to run like on different examples of input data and verify dedicated outputs separately. So for this, you will need to use data providers in different frameworks, libraries. They look differently. But anyway, most likely you are going to have them. Then test suites layer means that you should think how you can organize your tests in test suites with ability to run separate suites depending on which area of the application was touched during, let's say, mini regression rounds, or you can use parameterization and run all tests at once, but there should be underlying, let's say, not infrastructure, but you should think how you can handle test suites in different files or classes. Then login layer, meaning that if your tests do not produce any output, basically if they do not say what they are doing inside each and every test, then it will be really hard for you to debug them to understand why it's failed and where. So for this you will need to implement login for printing out messages to console, to terminal, and separately reporting, meaning that you will need to have HTML report generated after your tests have been run. Again, if you are using, for example, if you are using Java with Selenium, then you will have to implement it separately. If you are using some more advanced or more modern frameworks like Playwright, then Playwright has everything embedded. It will provide HTML report for you after test run has been completed. But if not, then you should implement each of those separately using separate dedicated libraries. Then you should also think how you will organize your config files, so you can easily manipulate it, pass different options with parameters like which environment to run, in which browser, and so on. It can be used as properties or as a .conf file or whatever, depending on your programming language. But anyway, this is a dedicated separate layer in your test mesh framework. It will have separate files for that. Then, as I mentioned earlier, test environment switcher to be able to run from CI/CD or from command line on different test environments without the need to modify your code. Again, depending on programming language you're going to use, it can be implemented differently, but nevertheless, it should have this ability. And also, most likely, you would also have a bunch of different helpers and utilities, like working with database. If you're going to insert some data or perform some modifications on a database level, you would want to have dedicated classes or files that will work with database or database layer. The same goes for file system. If you're going to manipulate file system, you will have dedicated file system helper or layer. Also reading settings, different test data for data providers. For example, if you're going to read your inputs from Excel spreadsheets, then you would have again separate dedicated files and logic implemented for that, and it will be like additional layer in test automation framework. So that's overall. There are some small things like you should also take screenshots in the moment of failure for a test to ease debugging troubleshooting, but it can be part of logging and reporting actually, and so on. So overall, that's it. It should give you the idea what kind of questions to ask and what capabilities or features your test automation framework should have based on your needs. That's it for this video. See you in the next one.